Slavery is not simply the exploitation of cheap labor. Slavery is the loss of choice, of free will, the subjugation of one human being by another. And it is enforced by violence and brutality. Despite common belief that it no longer exists, slavery is alive and well in today's world. Over 27 million men, women, and children live in slavery today.
You know, I mean, we need like a shift in our society. This idea that some people, some children are for sale and are commodities, and then, you know, after the fact we're going to help them is ridiculous. We need to start from the premise that we are equal and that we are all deserving of human rights.
Slavery is so abominable and takes away so much of the human dignity, the human spirit, that it's something that's to be fought. And I really believe that that's something I want to fight, spend my lifetime fighting.
If we don't do this, nobody's going to hold us accountable. Why you didn't do this? But if we don't do this, then we are doing something, crime with the humanity. So it is our duty as human beings.
All over the world, ordinary men and women refuse to accept this degradation of the human spirit and devote their time and efforts, often risking their lives in their insistence that all must be free. They are the new abolitionists of modern slavery, and they are united in a common goal: to free the slaves. In this documentary, we look at the different approaches of abolitionists in 4 countries, from simple retrieval and redemption to rehabilitation and education.
There are about 27 million people in slavery today, and that's defining slavery fairly narrowly as well. I'm not talking about sweatshops, and I'm not talking about people in prisons who are around the world who are being forced to do labor, anything like that. I'm talking about people who are held against their will, who cannot walk away, who are being paid absolutely nothing, who are being economically exploited. In other words, the kind of slavery that, you know, they would have recognized 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago as slavery. And with that narrow definition, it's about 27 million. And that may be the most people in slavery at any one point in human history.
Early morning in Malakwan, southern Sudan. There is a bitter civil war in Sudan between the mostly Arab north and the black African south, the Dinka. The war has been going on at some level for over 30 years, but the balance of power was changed with the discovery of oil and the seizure and control of this precious resource by northern forces. To date, at least 2 million people have died in the war, most of them from the south. As we met with the Dinka people, northern bombers flew constantly overhead. Their random bombing raids are designed simply to create terror. Canadian couple Jane Roy and Glenn Pearson travel to Sudan as often as they can to try to help. Jane first came to Sudan in 1998 as a volunteer with Goal, an Irish organization that focuses on famine relief.
Do puppies have names, Jolinia?
Before I actually left to come to Sudan, Glenn had actually seen a picture. We'd heard about slavery and heard about a Swiss-based human rights organization that was actually helping to redeem slaves. So part of what I wanted to do when I came to Sudan was actually find this group, find out if it was legitimate, find out all the questions we have when we hear about slave redemption.
In Sudan, Jane met with John Eibner from Christian Solidarity International.
Back in 1992, we received an invitation from the New Sudan Council of Churches to come on a fact-finding mission here, and that was my first encounter with Sudan, and we were shocked by what we saw and heard.
Part of the terror tactics of the North is to encourage unpaid militias to raid southern villages and take slaves.
Your payment is whatever you get. So you go down into the south and you can have whatever you want. You can take women, you can take children, you can take slaves, you can take cattle, you can take food. That essentially is your payment. So they've used that as a real instrument of terror. They will kill the men because men are the fighters. Women and children are taken as slaves, and women who resist even a little bit, or kids who run away, or kids who resist are killed on the spot. And they're taken up to the north. They're taken up as booty. They're forced to walk. They're not given food and water. Many of the women and the young girls are raped along the way. They're all made to carry the loads, and up they go up to the north, and there they're distributed. The person who captures them is the person who owns them. And he will oftentimes either sell them to someone else or give them to family members or make them as part of a cattle camp.
We came back several times and were invited by the community to support them and their own program to recover enslaved women and children, and we accepted their invitation to support them.
Because this is a civil war, the lines between North and South are blurred. Some Arabs in the North do not agree with slavery, and they help organize Arab retrievers to bring the slaves home. But that takes money, and that's where the concept of slave redemption comes in.
The slave redemption process actually works through peace accords between the Arabs and the Dinkas themselves. The whole idea of slave redemption actually is an indigenous one. It's their solution to a very complex kind of problem. When you see a big group of slaves all together in one picture, those folks have not traveled from the north altogether. Essentially, they've come down in groups of 1 or 2, sometimes 20 from the north. And essentially what happens is they wait in these areas until CSI can actually travel to Sudan. That happens essentially because we need to verify the number of people that need to be redeemed. We need to verify their stories. We need to verify their names, etc., those kind of things.
Anti-Slavery International in London is the world's oldest anti-slavery organization. Director Mike Dottridge has concerns about the numbers of slaves reported by CSI, as his own inquiries with Dinka in northern Sudan give a different picture.
They estimate that since the mid-80s, yes, many thousands of people have been abducted into slavery. They come up with estimates of a total, for example, around 14,000. But on the basis of that estimate that they make, they ridicule claims that already more than 40,000 people have been ransomed, and that's the claim that Christian Solidarity International makes.
There have been some media reports about possible fraud, so the abolitionists do what they can to work with local authorities to verify names and prevent false claims of slavery. And they also conduct random interviews with slaves. This young girl was in the fields with her friend when the raid came. Her friend resisted, and so they cut her throat. On the way north, she was raped by 3 men, including the man who became her owner. And in his home, she was forcibly circumcised with a razor blade. The stories are all horrifying. This young boy was with his family when the raiders came.
They captured my father and shot him. He died. My mother was also killed. She was beaten on the head with a big knife, a machete.
He was a slave for 2 years. He has no idea what happened to his younger brother.
What happened to you? Can you ask her the story of how she was captured?
The Muhaleen came and found me at the airstrip. We went there to get food, dropped by the WFP. I was there with my 3 children. We were ordered to move with the Muhaleen. When we arrived at the camp, my daughter, Abuk, was separated from me. She was only young. She was 10. 4 men came and raped her until she died. When I tried to cry out, they beat me and knocked out my teeth, as you can see. Then they raped me as well, all the time.
Can you tell her we are sorry?
It is the situation our country faces. No one can be blamed.
Christian Solidarity International pays the Northern Retrievers $35 US for the redemption of each slave.
When this started, here in anti-slavery, we could see some disadvantages. We could see that if money really was being put into the hands of the slave owners, that they almost had an economic incentive now to continue the system, even if individual captives were being ransomed, were being successfully freed.
The Dinka have consistently told us that this is something that they want, the Dinka fathers, the Dinka mothers, because it has not created a market in that sense where more people are being taken. I think from a Western point of view, we look at it and go, if we get somebody home and that means somebody else is taken and we are in essence creating this market, we should, with laws of supply and demand, actually see the number of slaves go up as the number of people that we redeem goes up. And what we've actually seen in the past 2 years is the number of people that we've redeemed have gone up. The number of people going into slavery has actually gone down, which to me says that they're not related.
There's also just, I suppose, the obvious message, which is that as soon as you pour money into a problem, it gives an incentive to various people to come looking for that money and to, for example, claim that someone is a slave when they haven't been.
I've seen the same criticisms in my work with the food bank. That involved in the food bank at home, in essence, people have said in the initial stages, well, you're creating a need. People will become more dependent. If you give free food, people will keep coming and just essentially abuse the system, and you're creating a market. And over the years, we've really been able to show that that's not the case. And to me, it's been the same thing with the slave redemption.
In Canada, Jane is the executive director of a food bank in London, Ontario, and Glenn is a local fire chief. They are both becoming increasingly aware that redemption may only be a first step in abolition, and they discuss this issue with Kevin Bales.
Redemption has been controversial within abolition, slavery abolition, for many, many centuries. You know, that Frederick Douglass said the sin is not in the redemption. You know, the sin is in taking someone into slavery, and redemption is just an unfortunate way that you may have to deal with the people who commit the crime of enslavement.
Any war situation is murky, and I think there's always a tendency within Westerners to always want to try to simplify murky things. And they go by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and so many other things. And I think those things are right and they're good motivators for us, but as soon as you get into the situation, it's really different. Once again, it gets back to this whole thing about human rights. You know, if we really believe in human rights, and let's use the political process the way that we should, let's go meet our local politician and ask him to take that in and do something about it.
True to their faith in democracy and the political process, Glenn and Jane have made many visits to their local MP, Joe Fontana, and they've succeeded in persuading him to take part of his vacation to go with them to Sudan and to see the situation for himself. Also on our flight were two Dinka men, Garang and Etienne. CSI had taken them to Nairobi, where they had been fitted with prosthetic devices. Now reunited with their wives, they told us their story.
Our wives and children were taken in a raid while we were away working in the fields. We followed the raiders, hoping in vain to rescue our families. But when we tried to sneak into the camp, we were caught. We were tied down on the ground and our arms were cut off with machetes. We were left to die.
I was taken to the north where me and my child were given to a master to work in his house. My child was too sick to work, so he was beaten until he died. I was forced to be a concubine to the master and his friends.
We have no news of our other children in the north.
This little boy was born in slavery. It's a common situation for women to return home with babies conceived while they were captive. Typically, their husbands accept the children into their families.
And these men know that their wives have just been gang raped, beaten, genitally mutilated, The last thing in the world that these men should do or need to do is say, you know, I don't want that child. That child was conceived in some of the most horrible circumstances anybody can imagine. So why not take it? And why not give it a chance? And why not give the wife and the mother a chance to now build a solid life with that child? So suddenly genetics doesn't play a part. The human spirit does. And suddenly you realize in that little portrait is the future of the world. That these men and women who have been through so much somehow can look past race, creed, color, so on and so forth, and bring a family together. That will happen with the human family someday. It's just not there right now.
In the village, Joe Fontana has the opportunity to meet with a group of redeemed slaves.
We were captured when we came out to get the food that the plane had dropped. They tied us together and forced us to carry heavy loads.
On the way north, a raider took my baby from my arms as I nursed. He hit the baby's head against a tree and threw it away. He told me to keep walking.
At times, you think it might have been better if you had been killed at the raid rather than suffer all of these things.
As a result of Joe's visit and Glenn and Jane's tireless lobbying, a task force of Canadian MPs are planning to visit Sudan to meet with representatives from the south. Meanwhile, what happens to the slaves once they've been redeemed?
Most people, when they return from the north, will find someone of their family. So they'll find an uncle or a brother or their father's cousin twice removed.
Family members have waited for the redemption process to be completed before they take the redeemed slaves home. Their future is uncertain. The war continues. There are still random raids on villages, and poverty and starvation lurk everywhere. Many of the slaves have been severely traumatized, and healing will not be easy. Still, for now, there is hope, and there is freedom. While in some parts of the world slavery is a result of war, in Mali, West Africa, slaves are simply a commodity.
If you go back to Mississippi in 1850, an average slave, an average agricultural slave, cost about $1,850. Well, that's $38,000 to $40,000 in today's money. I mean, slaves were a major investment. Slaves are so cheap today that slaves are just simply disposable. I mean, the entire economic equation of slavery has been altered by the fact that they're so much cheaper than they've ever been in human history. And that simply means that they're throwaway items in a production process. You bring them in, you use them up as hard as you can, and then you can kill them, you can throw them away, it doesn't matter. And I suppose one of the things that's most horrific about that today is that the use of slaves has moved into areas which are very low skill, and that means children are more likely to be used and enslaved than they were in the past, and also that children are more likely to be used up after they've been enslaved and then disposed of.
After many years of drought, Mali ranks 7th from the bottom of the UN's Development Index of 174 nations. Most of Mali's 11 million residents live in abject poverty. The young people try to find work in the towns, desperate to send money home to their families, desperate for a future. They are easy prey to traffickers, lured by promises of high wages and training opportunities in next-door Côte d'Ivoire. An estimated 15,000 Malian youths aged between 8 and 18 are enslaved in Côte d'Ivoire. The boys work mainly in plantations, growing coffee, cocoa, cotton, yams or plantains. For the girls, slavery in Côte d'Ivoire usually means domestic work and the inevitable sexual exploitation. In October 2000, Save the Children Canada opened Horonso, a transit centre in Sikasso, Mali, for victims of child trafficking. Madame Tigana is executive director of Horonso. She understands the problem of child trafficking only too well. She adopted 2 nephews after her sister died, and they went looking for work long before many people knew about child trafficking. Madame Tigana searched and searched, but her boys are lost.
Donc je suis au centre ici dans l'espoir de retrouver mes 2 neveux. Je ne sais pas comment ils sont. Il y a des enfants qui viennent me dire qu'ils ont vu les sacs des enfants maliens qui sont décédés dans les plantations. Quelquefois, je me mets en tête, donc ils sont décédés ou bien. Et puis je n'oublie pas les derniers conseils que leur maman m'a donnés. Donc vraiment, je vois que c'est moi qui suis responsable. Donc s'ils sont dans les plantations, vraiment, je ne sais pas comment sont devenir ces enfants, ni rien. Donc vraiment, je suis ici dans l'espoir de retrouver mes 2 neveux. C'est pour ça que j'ai décidé de travailler ici. Je vais lutter jusqu'au bout pour que les rapatriements puissent faire, pour que je puisse retrouver les enfants ou bien de trouver une nouvelle sur eux.
Moussar is one of the boys Madame Tigana has helped. After his father died, he went to the town of Sikasso to look for work. He desperately needed money to send back to his mother. Unable to find work, he was approached by a trafficker who offered him 100,000 CFAs per year and free transport to a plantation in Côte d'Ivoire.
It took us 2 days to drive to the plantation. When we arrived, they took away all my papers and put me to work in a field to cut plantain. The work was very hard, too hard, so I asked to leave. No, they said. You have to pay us money. You'll have to pay for your food and transport. You'll have to stay until you've worked it off.
Other boys told us a similar story.
You cannot go, he told us. I've paid money for you. If you want to go, you'll have to pay me my money, or I'll beat you to death. So we were afraid.
There were many children. We were all locked up in one room for the night. There was one hole in the middle as a toilet, and small holes in the wall for peeing out of.
During the night, there will be a guard outside with a gun watching us. We were not given new clothes. We had to sleep, all of us, in one room. We had no beds, just sacks on the floor. In the rainy season, the roof leaked and the worms came out of the ground at night. They beat you everywhere.
The owner would beat the other boys in front of us if they weren't working hard enough. Every day they would beat one of us. We were followed everywhere by a guard with a whip. If we weren't working hard enough, he would whip you. One day we complained. We will leave, we said. The owner threatened us. If you try to leave, we will catch you and will take a razor blade and tear the soles of your feet. We were afraid to leave.
L'enfant nous a dit que quand lui, il a essayé de s'enfuir, donc on a pris son pied, on a pris un lame pour déchirer son pied, voilà. Donc on a mis du sel là-dedans. Et puis on l'a frappé, tout son corps est blessé. Donc ça permet aux autres de ne pas s'enfuir. Donc ils ont vu ce qui se passe avec leurs camarades. Donc les enfants ne fuient jamais.
In cotton, coffee, cocoa plantation, they have to carry, for some of them, they have to carry heavy loads, like 60, 70 kilos of whatever that is, on their shoulder. And as a result, you can see, like I've seen many of them with open wounds that never have a chance to heal.
They beat me. I had scars all over my body. I was so injured that I couldn't work. But they said if I didn't work, they would just beat me again.
Quand Moussa a essayé de s'enfuir, le planteur, quand il arrivait ici à Sikasso, il avait tous les corps blessés parce qu'il arrive. Les jours même qu'on partait l'amener dans les plantations, il était malade, il avait la diarrhée, tout, il était blessé. On allait dire même qu'il va mourir avant demain. Donc il y a tout cet aspect. Donc les enfants ont peur même de s'enfuir. Donc ils n'ont pas le choix. Ils sont obligés de rester et travailler. Ils n'ont pas le choix.
In many villages across Mali, families are waiting for news of their young people. Barima Traore and Seydou Mali spent over a year in slavery in Côte d'Ivoire. One day, a funeral in the local village provided an opportunity for one of the boys in their plantation to escape. The others gave him letters for their families and covered his absence as long as possible.
When I got the letter, I had to do something. I had no money, so I sold my cow, so I could afford to travel to Côte d'Ivoire to find my son. In Côte d'Ivoire, the Malian consulate helped me to rescue the boys.
Michel Larouche of Save the Children Canada has been working for over 2 years with local governments to find solutions to the problem.
The agreement that exists now between Ivory Coast and Mali is unique in Africa. And it's just to fight against child trafficking. It's only for that very purpose. And well, we feel it's a result of our work, but it's also the result of the will of the two governments to put a stop to it. We know that, well, there's a new law that's been voted, and it's in action since January 2002 in Mali, and it's the child trafficking alone is punishable of 20 years of jail. That's stronger than what we have in Canada, and I believe it is stronger than anything that exists in this world right now.
At the border, the police now watch out for the young travelers and arrest any known traffickers. But although 500 children have been repatriated from Côte d'Ivoire and returned to their families in the last 2 years, the problem is not over. The traffickers have moved away from the main roads, taking to the villages and the fields, business as usual. These children are among the few lucky ones who escaped the plantations alive. They managed to make contact with Malian expatriates living and working in Côte d'Ivoire, and then the Malian consulate helps them get back across the border.
When they come to the transit center, of course they eat well, they sleep well, but what's magic, what's impressed me the most is to see them play. Basically, they just play, laugh silly, like kids do. And this is, to me, like the most beautiful result you can attain.
Madame Tiganar welcomes some of the children who have just arrived and explains the rules of the center. The average age of these children is 15. They give the children medical checkups and supply them with clean clothes. Seydou was lucky. He escaped from his plantation after only 2 weeks, but it was a traumatic experience nevertheless.
All their rights are being denied. And that's exactly why we're there. That's exactly why we're working to try to, first of all, take them out. But taking them out is not the only solution. They have to come back to a situation where they can live, they can appreciate, they can heal again, but from being traumatized.
Typically, the children stay at the center about 5 days, and during that time, they receive support and counseling.
Qui est vraiment un aspect extrêmement important pour un enfant qui est victime de traumatisme, l'écoute qui va permettre donc non seulement de connaître cet enfant, de savoir pourquoi il est parti, de savoir ce qui lui est arrivé là-bas, les conditions dans lesquelles il vivait là-bas, et aussi d'où vient cet enfant. Maintenant qu'il a pu échapper à ce phénomène, qu'est-ce qu'il a l'intention de faire, quel est son futur, quel est son devenir.
Essentially, the underlying cause of child trafficking is poverty.
It's hard. We are very poor. After the rainy season, there's nothing for the young people to do in the village. No work, no food.
Le problème est trop costaud, il est trop grand, il est trop complexe pour un seul acteur. Il faut plusieurs acteurs. Mais des acteurs ont été identifiés par rapport à la réinsertion socio-économique des enfants, comme l'OIM, qui se propose de s'occuper de cette réinsertion et aussi du rapatriement. Donc l'OIM va rapatrier les enfants, mais l'OIM va également faire des consultations pour savoir exactement ce que les enfants veulent faire et trouver les financements pour que ces enfants puissent faire ce qu'ils ont l'intention de faire.
We can take them back and not resolve anything. They're in misery, of course, now, but you put them back in their earlier misery or past misery, so what's the point, really? But so we have to advocate very strongly for the leaders of this world to take the fight against poverty seriously and to do something real, not just conferences and talks and reports. We need action.
I don't want you to give us cash. Suppose you give us $1 million now. We are so poor in this village that we will never ever agree on how to share it. I know that, okay? But when we say help, we mean sustainable things, sustainable projects, something we can do as an activity in order to get money. Before giving a fish to somebody, teach him how to get a fish.
For us Canadians, we still want to have our coffee, chocolate, and everything on the shelves at about the same price, not to, you know, and I know, and I tell people that if we fight against child trafficking, if I'm asking the Canadians to give money, it's on a long-term basis, not to put a stop to it, but they'll have to pay their chocolate, their cotton, and their coffee a little bit more on the long run.
After 5 days at Toronto, it's time for Sidhu to return to his home. Madame Tigana always accompanies the boys on their return. It's the happiest part of her job. Everyone is very shy and intimidated by our camera as Sidhu greets his friends, watched by his father, his mother, and as he pays his respects to the village elder.
Je suis content parce que j'ai apporté d'aide à d'autres et puis tout le monde. La personne même ne peut pas se féliciter de lui-même. Donc c'est les autres, les gens extérieurs qui peuvent me féliciter vraiment. C'est ce que j'ai à dire.
We have, in Canada and elsewhere in the world, we have to be careful because it's going to reach us as well. It's the economy, it's money, money talks. If we don't do anything, and that starts with the fight against poverty, the real fight against poverty, and that's why we have to do something. It's going to reach us, it's going to take our children.
Victoria, British Columbia, peaceful, picture perfect, and yet even here at home our children are at risk.
Victoria is advertised internationally on international websites and all over the place as the cheapest and easiest ways to get full-service entertainment. So we're actually known as the prostitution capital of North America.
For some people, prostitution in any form is seen as a kind of slavery. And for other people, particularly the people who work with prostitutes, some of them say, no, it's a kind of job that gets done, and you have to increase the quality of the work in which that they do. You have to bring in health and safety and job security and protection and like that. And it's all about, in many ways, how much control a person has over their life.
Cherry Kingsley became a prostitute at 13. Now she devotes her life to helping children exit the sex trade.
Other people might get rich, but certainly not. When children are involved, consent is a non-issue. consent is irrelevant because a child can't consent to their own abuse, and it is abuse. So whenever a child, and by child, the UN definition is 18 and under, so whenever a child is involved, it is slavery. There is no choice, whether there's the appearance of consent or not.
Both in Europe and elsewhere, we have a phenomenon of commercial sexual exploitation of children, child prostitution, which may have existed behind closed doors 30 or 40 years ago, but which was unexposed. Now, that's a form of exploitation which receives a lot more attention now, and we consider it to be a new form of slavery.
I was trapped. I mean, I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. I didn't go anywhere alone. When I worked, there was somebody that stood beside me the whole time. You know, when I finished with a client, there was somebody right there that took the money.
I have talked to girls that tell me of being tied up and held in closets, tied up in the basement.
I wouldn't eat for days on end. He wouldn't bring me anything to eat. Occasionally a glass of water if I begged and I had to beg.
They threatened me, they threatened my family. They knew that I came from Victoria. They knew I had a little sister.
And if ever I put up a fight, it would get pretty violent. There were a few incidences where he'd put a butterfly knife to my throat.
The control that they have, it's not only can they just lock you in a room and close the door, it's over your mind, it's over your spirit.
These girls will say that I was held against my will, and a defense lawyer will ask, well, was he with you 24 hours a day? Were you physically locked into a room? And the answer is no, but still, in their mind, they were forcibly held. And really, one is as bad as the other.
And I think we have to call it slavery. I think we have to be brave and challenge this idea that we all live free in these countries, in North America, Western Europe, and stuff. And I don't think it's fair that other people would get to define my reality, because I know what it was like. I know that I worked 18 hours a day or more in freezing weather, you know, servicing 8 to 10 men a day or more. I kept nothing. I had nothing. You know, sometimes I didn't have money for coffee even. I know the beatings and the rapes, and I know the fact that most of us didn't survive. So I don't know how much worse it has to be for people to call it slavery, or to say even that it's wrong. I don't know what people are waiting for, how many people need to die, or how many thousands of children need to be involved, or how prevalent it has to be, or whether, you know, the more and more middle-class children need to be exploited. Like, I don't know what people are waiting for them to give it a name and for them to say it's not okay.
Just how big a problem is child exploitation in Canada?
If I said 100, well, a large segment of society would be shocked. Another large segment of society would say, well, it's only 100 kids. How many resources are we going to dedicate to 100 kids? And I could take that number to 1,000, 10,000, or 100,000. At some point, it carries more weight. But then I go back to, isn't one enough?
Current estimates indicate that up to 350,000 children are victims of commercial exploitation in Canada and the US.
There's thousands of young people here in the sex trade in Canada. You know, I went to 22 communities across Canada. I, you know, went to places that are so remote. I went to places that are very rural. And everywhere I went, there was young people being exploited. I think most people have a lot of misperceptions, misconceptions about the sex trade. They think of it as a woman in a miniskirt and high heels standing on a street corner. And they usually imagine an adult woman as well. And they don't realize that it's young boys, young girls, and that it's in nightclubs and restaurants and hotels and taxis and people's apartments and bathhouses and escort agencies, massage parlors. And there's one estimate that only 10 to 15% of the sex trade is on the street in Canada, that most of it is indoors. And, you know, of course, when it's hidden like that, then the young people are more vulnerable.
We notoriously have trouble in Toronto at the bus terminal. We have trouble at the train station. The pimps know when they see a lone young person getting off of a bus with a backpack and nothing else, and no one else, there's a potential target. Another classic spot for us is the Toronto Eaton Centre. There's nothing particular about the Eaton Centre, it's just the big shopping mall downtown, and kids like to hang out in shopping malls. So they go to where the other kids are. But again, the kid that's come from elsewhere, that's run away, that's carrying her life over her shoulder in her backpack, is looking for that affection or companionship. She's looking for a place to stay at night. And a pimp may walk by 30 girls and get told to move along until he hits on one that shows him some interest. And then with a little work, he realizes he might have someone that he can use.
I get so frustrated when people say that the root cause of children involved in sexual slavery, adults involved in sexual slavery, is poverty, because I think that's only half of the equation. I think that can explain why people are vulnerable to being exploited, but it doesn't explain why those with money exploit. I think the root cause, truly, is people want to buy sex with children. I think that's the reality. I think, and if we can be even more frank, it's men that want to buy sex from children.
In 1998, Cherry Kingsley organized the first ever World Congress of Youth Sex Trade Workers. 55 young people from 10 countries came together to develop an agenda for action, which Cherry presented to the United Nations.
The thing is, if we come out of the shadows, where do we go? Where do we live? Who do we talk to?
Peers, the Prostitutes Education and Empowerment Resource Society in Victoria, is one of many organizations Cherry has helped create across Canada to answer this need. Staffed almost exclusively by ex-prostitutes, Peers offers many different programs. Among them, Second Chance, a life skills program for youth.
Yeah, just come on down. We're here right now.
We've been very successful at assisting people exiting. And one of the reasons is because we're predominantly sex trade workers. So we're able to identify the needs immediately because we are there, and then we're able to implement those needs, and in a very successful way. We've got, I think one of the reasons that it works so well is because we've been able to be models of how successful you can be when you exit. We've been able to bring people in that may not be aware of some of the transferable skills, and to be able to show them that.
They gave me a chance. They saw who I was as a person. They didn't see what I had to do for whatever reason I had to do it for. There was no judgment at all, and they listened.
And one of the things that I notice very much at Peers is that altruism is a huge reason why people successfully stay out of the trade.
I really wanted to come back and just give back what I got, which was a second chance, which is kind of funny because I'm doing the second chance program at this time.
We also have housing. We have second stage housing, so we're working more towards women who have been in the sex trade, are trying to get out, have had their children apprehended, are trying to get their kids back so that they can move in and work with a social worker to try to get their children back in a supportive environment for a year. And then after that year, if they're not ready, of course they can stay. And if they are ready, then we try to move them back into the mainstream, get their own apartment, get them set up. But we've been able to, you know, really assist them in being able to build a family. They've got life skills, and that's been really successful. And yeah, that's been one of my favorite ones.
You know, you need food and safety and shelter and you know, maybe medical attention or whatever, right? The very kind of physical, practical, tangible things that can help you exit the sex trade. And then there's that kind of healing that needs to happen, healing and empowerment and kind of taking your place in the circle.
Police are not always known for their sympathetic approach to young prostitutes, but Detective Steve Tracy is one of the exceptions.
Yes, that's right.
Steve heads the Toronto Police Youth Target Force.
It's the one thing that you can really do for a person that's had a horrible experience and gone through being manipulated, being used, being exploited. The best thing you can give them is power or control. Give them back the power position.
Steve believes the courts can be a route to give power back to a young person.
Facing the fear and going into court and actually seeing that person, it's one step. Then to actually tell your tale in front of him to responsible authorities that listen and care is another step. I do use the term empowerment quite a bit in this job, and it's such a cliche word. I hate to use it, but it is the only thing that describes what we are able to give back to these children. And why do I do it? Because it's the most rewarding thing I've ever experienced in policing.
As a result of budget cuts, Detective Steve Tracy no longer works for the Youth Target Force and has been returned to regular police duties. Meanwhile, Cherry Kingsley continues her work at the grassroots level and has become a powerful advocate for exploited youth. Despite all the applause, it's been a hard journey from the slavery of prostitution to the very public life of an abolitionist.
There was a period of time there where I wasn't in the sex trade anymore, and I was trying to advocate on the issues, though, you know, and to be effective, I couldn't remain in the sex trade, you know, and so there was this while where I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I wasn't no longer a person in the sex trade and having that day-to-day connection, but I certainly didn't fit in, you know, inside the government meetings or the bureaucracies or the NGOs or whatever that I was trying to convince, you know, that this was a serious issue. You know, like, I mean, really, there were times where I thought, personally, you know, like the personal price, I didn't want to do it, you know, because, I mean, I have a little boy, and we do suffer sometimes because I'm public.
In the year 2000, Cherry Kingsley was awarded the Governor-General's Award in commemoration of the Persons Case, which promotes the equality of women in Canada.
I just hope that this award will symbolize for children across Canada that they could achieve anything regardless of where they come from and what's happened to them. And I hope it will inspire other young people, particularly Aboriginal youth. Thank you.
My healing was, you know, finding my voice for sure, having a voice and you know, and shedding some of the shame and the fear and being willing to stand up publicly and talk about my experiences.
I want to come out because I want girls to see that someone got out and she's being open about it and people helped her and people love her and she has a perfectly normal life despite what happened. And hopefully if people see that I'm coming out, that they'll gain the courage to come out or at least more actively seek help.
With opportunity comes obligation, And I just have been given so much opportunity over the last few years, and there's an obligation with that. You know, my freedom that I have is not complete without the freedom of my people, you know, the people that I represent. I can never be completely free until my constituency, the young people that I represent are free as well.
I think people who are moved deeply by slavery always start off thinking about liberation. I mean, it's a sort of obvious thing. You see people in slavery, you say, we've got to get them free. And I've certainly felt that myself many times. After you've worked in abolition, after you've worked in helping to get people free, you begin to realize they may not ever be truly free until they have an opportunity to grow out of their enslavement.
A brick kiln in Maharati State, India. Bricks made in the early dawn dry quickly in the sizzling afternoon sun. Children run around with their mothers loading bricks on their heads, 8, 12, 16 at a time. The families live in shacks at the edge of the kiln. The stench of sulfur is everywhere. The coal dust gets in your skin, in your mouth, in your nose, and in your stomach. The beauty of the mountains north of Mumbai belies the reality of existence for the tribal people who live there. In India's rigorous caste system, the tribals, the indigenous people, are the lowest of the low. Despite India's constitution that promises justice, liberty, equality and fraternity to all its citizens, an estimated 20 million low-caste tribal people live in bonded labor, in slavery. A small loan taken from a landowner to pay for a marriage, a funeral, or during an illness results in the slavery of whole families, whole generations.
The most prevalent kind is the kind that most people in the West don't understand. It's where a person borrows money, but they themselves and all the work that they do then it acts as collateral. So anything they do doesn't pay back the loan. So if I borrowed the money from you as the slaveholder or the money lender, every bit of work that I do, and usually every bit of work that my family does, doesn't pay back that loan. It's simply collateral until I do pay back that loan. Well, so then you're going to ask, well, how on earth do you get to pay back the loan? And the answer is, you don't. That's why we find families where 4 generations have been bonded against an original loan.
Husbands and wives work together in the fields, in the factories, on the brick kilns, in the homes of their landlords. And a child born to them learns to carry bricks as soon as he can walk. In the last 20 years, Vivek and Vidyata Pandit and the organizations they created have offered hope, freedom and dignity to bonded laborers in Maharati State.
Vivek Pandit and his organization based in Western India have spent a lot of time talking to people who are bonded laborers, who are in slavery, in order essentially to convince them that they can walk away. Now that sometimes means that they're urging them more or less into rebellion and they go through quite a tough time, that they are assaulted, beaten up by their owner or by someone else, and he's empowering them to go through that and come out the other side and say, I am free and no one can reduce me back to slavery.
In the life of bonded laborers, the torture, sufferings are common. They have to go bed hungry. They don't have future. They don't have dreams, hopes. And in the condition which they live, they have no other option but to accept the situation and live their life. So I realized that all these sufferings, which we feel are the sufferings, were the routine things for them. I used to ask them that, are you unhappy? No. Means happiness, unhappiness, that also they were not knowing. But the question when I used to ask them, that what you feel your child should be. Your child should be like you. Because you are happy, you have no torture, you have no suffering. And then each and every bonded laborer tell me that, no, we don't want our child to be like us, or even to be like agricultural laborer. Let him be anybody else, but other than the life which we are living. That means they had that feeling that the life in which they are living is not a human life.
When they work outside, women have to face injustice and outrage from their landlords, and at home they face all sorts of mistreatment and beatings from their husbands or in-laws. The women are so used to such beating and bad treatment as slaves that when we asked them, they said women have another rib just to get beaten up. Beating is obvious. Landlords or employers used to help poor men laborers with money for their marriages. And then there was an unwritten agreement that starting from the first night of the marriage, the wife had to stay with the landlord any time he wanted to use her for his needs. The most horrifying problem was women being auctioned. They used to sell women, many times little girls aged 14 or 15, just for money. Mostly older men in their 50s and 60s used to buy them if they had lots of money. With money, you can do anything.
The Pandits started to visit villages and towns, talking with the bonded laborers and explaining to them that their slavery was not legal under the Constitution, that they had the right to say no. It's a process that Vivek still continues today.
Bonded laborer is in bondage because that bonded laborer feels that he is in bond, he is in bondage. So our role is to make him feel free. So it is what Abraham Lincoln has said, freedom lies in the hearts of the people. And if it lies there, it needs no law, no constitution, and no court. But if it dies there, then no law, no constitution, and no court can protect it. So it is the psychological freedom is necessary.
Over the years, the Pandits have created a veritable haven of peace and hope at their campus at Uzgaon, 60 kilometers north of Mumbai. One of the main functions is to provide education. This is a boarding school for children who used to be in bonded labor.
1, 2.
There is a library, a farm for training in organic agriculture. Courses are offered in literacy, advocacy, teacher training. There are always people coming and going from local villages and organizations.
Our office is like a Mahir Shibir, which means mother's home, where the women can come and relax and have a chat, share their joys and sorrows. There we have small classes to educate them through role-playing, special lectures on body science. We brought in skeletons of men and women and showed them that men and women are exactly alike. Women don't have that extra rib. Actually, women have extra powers. They have the power and ability to give birth to a new life.
The Wali Art Studio on the campus is one of their cooperative ventures. The Wali are a tribal people, and Doma Desak finds regained dignity in practicing this traditional craft. Wali paintings depict scenes of local life. They reflect the reality of the hardships that exist so nearby in the surrounding fields, where small children labor from early dawn to sunset every day.
In Thane district alone, 25,000 child laborers work in the brick factories. We decided if the children can't come to the schools, we will go to the children. And so we started a few schools near those brick factories. We called them Banga Shala. Shala is school, and Banga is the word for a hay house. With passion and lots of hard work, in just 6 years, we have been able to increase the number of schools. And now, more than 3,500 children attend our schools.
School-aged children are responsible for their younger siblings while their parents work, so everyone is welcome. Their young teachers, often former bonded laborers themselves, have been trained at the Pandits campus, and they live at the schools alongside their students. The campus is also home of Shramjeevi Sangatana, the laborers' union, which came to life to help empower former slaves to take control of their own freedom. Keshav Nankar is the embodiment of everything these organizations stand for. A released bonded laborer, Keshav is now the executive director of the union. Keshav's family help him build an extra room on his house. He and his wife were in bonded labor for a loan they took out for their wedding. For years, they worked for nothing more than a kilo of rice a week.
In 1983, the Pandits organization came to our village, and I and lots of other laborers joined. With the help of Vivek and Vidyulata, we did a case on the village manager, and at last, I was free from bondage. The manager organized a boycott of all of us, and nobody was willing to give us any work. Vivek reminded us to be firm in our decision and not to go back to the landlords again. We started a new slogan at that time. We will starve to death, but we will not go back to the landlords. For about 6 months, we didn't have enough to eat, but we survived. With Vivek's ideas and help, we started group farming. A group of 5 of us who were bonded laborers started farming a small piece of land and shared the profits.
Now, Keshav oversees several farming cooperatives like this one. Here, the farmers, all former bonded laborers, proudly told us that they would be in profit within the month. Once an uneducated bonded laborer, Keshav has become a much beloved leader of his people.
The person who has gone through all the slavery and injustice and abuse can best understand the pain of others who are still experiencing it. Only these people can work towards the common goal. And that is why I'm here. I can understand the problems, the pain, and I can try to help.
In 1999, Vivek and Vidyata Pandit were awarded the Anti-Slavery Medal of Recognition by Anti-Slavery International in London. Over the last 20 years, Vivek and his organization have helped almost 2,000 bonded laborers find their freedom.
We had a slogan, we tribals and laborers are not beasts of burden. We are not cattle. We are human beings, and we don't want charity. We want our right as human beings.
Inevitably, there has been resistance. There have been beatings, death threats, imprisonment, and false charges.
I have no complaint about their assault, their threatening, their abuses, their registering false complaint against us, they defaming us, because it is their reaction, and which I feel from their point of view is right, because they are going to lose the power. And if I expect them to keep silence, then I'm not a logical person. The owners tried to even kill me They assaulted many of our activists. They assaulted on our gatherings. Our persons were injured. Some of our persons were killed. But we remain non-violent. And I feel that is our strength. We use the Constitution and the law.
Despite the Pandits' amazing efforts, the problem of bonded labor in India continues. Najibai cannot walk upright. She can only crawl. But she and her husband have worked as bonded laborers all her life. 2 months ago, her husband asked her owner for permission to attend the religious festival of Lord Krishna. The owner refused. Her husband asked again. The owner became very angry, and he hit Najibai's husband so hard he was killed. Late that night, the owner's bodyguards dumped the body in this hut behind their home. The official reason for his death was given as tuberculosis. Vivek Pandit learned of the story and has petitioned for the body to be exhumed and a proper post-mortem to be performed. Although fully aware of the rampant corruption, wherever he can, Vivek solicits the help of local authorities and police to invoke the very laws against slavery that exist in the Constitution. He tries to create, as he puts it, an atmosphere where the law machinery will have no other option but to enforce the Constitution and the law. Part of Vivek's commitment to non-violence stems from a belief that each person is capable of change. He has an open-door policy at the campus and is always ready to listen to anyone who comes by. Bonded laborers, workers, teachers, but also business people, politicians, and the landowners themselves.
The work Vivek Pandit is doing is great. They started Bongashala for the factory workers' kids.
Ramesh Garrett no longer has bonded laborers working on his brick kilns, and he has opened schools on his sites. Education is a recurring theme for abolitionists the world over. And in a country where an estimated 20 million people still live in bondage, these children at least can grow up in freedom. For our Canadian abolitionists, Jane Roy and Glenn Pearson, the focus of their efforts has moved away from redemption to rehabilitation and education. They are now working with the Canadian government to raise funds to build schools in southern Sudan.
I think that the new abolitionists really do believe that it's not about freeing the slaves. It's not about slave redemption. You know, it's not about the Underground Railroad. It's not about all of those things in the end. It's about these people having free and legitimate lives that don't belong to anybody else and living in free and open societies where they can progress. And we have lived long enough, we've talked to enough people, we've studied history books long enough we've been told that the thing that guarantees that kind of right, might take a number of years, is education.
After getting people out of slavery, it changes their life for a moment in terms of the sense of freedom. But now, being able to pursue education, it'll hopefully change their country for a lifetime.
These people that aren't free are us. There are our sisters, our mothers, our brothers, our children. I mean, they are us. We can't turn a blind eye. And, you know, when people aren't free, it affects us in every aspect of our life. It's a collective thing. It's not just, you know, turning a blind eye to it because it's too painful to see. Because if you turn a blind eye because it's too painful to see, it's going to get bigger.
And I think if we ever hope to have peace in this world, it'll be because we have a commitment to justice and we have a commitment to human rights. And you can't have a commitment to human rights and justice when a segment of your society are commodities.
I know there are a lot of injustices in the world, and there's a lot of exploitation, and there's a lot of violence. But you know, slavery is injustice and violence and exploitation all rolled together in probably its most potent form. And if there's one thing we can all agree on as human beings, I think it's that, you know, there should be no slavery. And I feel that we have to ask ourselves, if we live in the West, if we live in North America, and we have all this social and economic power, what good is that power if we can't use it to end slavery? And I mean, really, if we can't use our power to end slavery, how can we say we're free ourselves?
As Martin Luther King has said, that nobody is free till everybody is free.